समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There is only one story these days, that is the trade war that Donald Trump has unleashed on the world, in some ways on America, on American markets, and on himself as well. However, the only person in the world who it seems is not unfazed by this is Donald Trump himself. So as this is playing havoc with the world's markets, everything running in red, except if I saw Indian markets this morning, except one index which is in green, which is the volatility index. So when everything else is red and volatility index is green, you know that you are in deep trouble. But that's true of every market in the world, and Trump seems to be enjoying it. A bit like Aag Lagi Humri Jhupadiya Mein Hum Gaave Malhar. Remember from Dilip Kumar in Sagina? So it's a little bit like that I burnt my house down. In fact, Americans have great Americanisms. So one of the Americanisms I've read lately is that Donald Trump's method right now is like burning your house to cook a steak. Right? He's trying to get some more leverage in trade. In the process, he's destroyed the markets for now. I know Trump has his supporters as well. I am right now not giving you an opinion. I might write at the end of the week the usual national interest. However, what we're going to do is, this story will be with us for the next several days, maybe more than several days, maybe for weeks. So we will be visiting this story again and again. Also, it's a complicated story. Trade is not something that I was designed to understand, right? But everybody has to learn. I'm also trying to learn. So one way of learning that is to break it down. So I learned a long time back that you have to salami slice a problem, right? Because the whole loaf becomes too difficult to handle. So take out one slice and deal with it, which is what I'm doing with this episode of Cut the Clutter. So the one thing that I'm looking at right now is US and China, and starting with the question, Donald Trump ko gussa kyun aata hai? And sharing some figures with you and also some wisdom from those figures. So first of all, see the overall deficit and the overall surplus figures. If you see global trade right now, two countries are top of the pops. One top of the pops on the upside, that is for trade surpluses, China, about $1 trillion of surplus. In fact, we had a full episode of Cut the Clutter on that. We will share a link with you with the description, so please do check it out. Similarly, at the bottom, the top of the pops at the bottom, for the biggest loser in the trade balance is America, with deficit of about $1 trillion. Both can go up a little bit, right? One either can miss the trillion mark by just a little bit here and there, but effectively, broadly, both are in the $1 trillion category. China for surplus, America for deficit. All of America's deficit is not with China. America's deficit is with a lot of countries. I would say with most of the countries, including India. America also has surplus from some countries, but that doesn't bother Donald Trump because he has thrown tariffs at everybody, even countries with which the US has surplus. So that is not the issue. Issue is what is irritating him most of all, and what is still keeping his basis support with him is the idea that America has become dependent on China, which is its biggest adversary. So if China is your biggest adversary, how come China has such a surplus in trade against you? That is the politics that Trump is driving at. And that is what is frustrating Trump. And that is why Trump ko gussa aata hai. Because his last term, he had put fresh tariffs on China, with which China's exports to America did go down, but at the same time, the big deficit continued. because China simply produces too many things at too good a quality and too competitive a price for the American manufacturers to compete with the Chinese. That is the source of Trump's anger, which he's then taking out on the rest of the world as well. Now look at some basic figures. I told you that overall, if you look at the overall total trade, one has a surplus of $1 trillion, the other has a deficit of $1 trillion. Now look at the trade between them. If you look at the trade between them, I will give you round figures because decimals become very clumsy, but you will see precise figures on your screens. All of America's exports to China, all, that is goods plus services. Remember, very often when we see data on trade, we only see goods, we don't see services. Service is now a very important part of our economies and also of our trade. So goods plus services, America's total exports to China are say $200 billion. You will see I will tell you the precise figure in this one, so you get the trend. I will then be rounding them off to the last decimal point. So $200 billion, precise figure being $199.183 billion. That was America's exports to China. America's imports from China, on the other hand, is $462.5 billion. That gives us a deficit, or that gives the US a deficit of $263.3 billion. However, America has a trade surplus with China when it comes to services. Services exports to China are $54.6 billion and imports are 22.7. So if you do your basic math, this gives America a surplus of $31.8 billion. So if you just looked at goods exports, which is what is bothering Trump most of all, because services have no taxes, no duties or no customs or no tariffs, right? So if you just look at goods trade, on goods trade itself, America has a deficit of $295 billion. Goods, America exports 144.5, America imports 439.7. That $295 billion deficit is then reduced by the surplus in services, which is 31.8. So you get a net figure of American deficit, which is $263.3 billion. That is what is bothering Donald Trump, and that's what's frustrating him and making him happy. Once again, see this with another larger figure, because he wants to once again re-industrialize America. As Fareed Zakaria said, that his idea of a fast-moving America or a prosperous America is not even America of the 1960s. It's America of the 19th century, right? Big machinery, etc., maker, and mostly content within itself. However, his idea of re-industrializing America comes from a nostalgia that you should have factories where tens of thousands of people work. Never mind the fact that American economy has moved into high-tech area, in services area. It's building brands. If I'm able to bring this episode to you, it's because of YouTube. You're watching it probably on an Apple device as well. So Americans are there in all our lives. However, Trump wants manufacturing. He wants to see factories where people in factory clothing come in shifts in large numbers and then go out. And that's where when he looks at the picture, he finds that America has a deficit in goods trade with almost everybody. 40% of that overall deficit, however, comes from just 3 countries in goods trade. Just 3 countries, that is Canada, China, and Mexico. And as I said, after his tariffs in 2018, which Biden left intact, the goods import from China has declined, but not sufficiently to assuage him. He now thinks that he can teach the Chinese a lesson. In the process, all the rest of the world is also getting caught. Now look at some basic figures which will tell us some specific causes of this irritation. You will see the 2 tables on your screens, right? So please peruse them. Please take a close look. These will run slowly. We will also freeze them at some point so you can see these data telling you what does the US import from China And what does the US export to China? And this is only for goods. As we have seen, the deficit on goods alone is around $295 billion. Now see, what is it that America buys from China? So number one item in that list is electrical and electronic equipment. That is $127 billion. $127 billion. And I will tell you another figure. On the other side, what is it that the America sends most of all? What is the item of largest export from America to China? Hold your breath. It's the same heading. It's the same head. Electrical and electronic equipment. What is the value? $15.2 billion. That is less than a tenth of what the Chinese export to America of these high-tech manufactured goods, high-tech manufactured value-added goods. That is a source, obviously, of great irritation to Donald Trump. In fact, if you look at the China list, I've only ranked different items by volume as imported by America. And you might ask me, why have we stopped at 8? Why not 10? Why not 15? Why not 3? Why not 5? I will tell you the reason. The reason is that what is the top item on the Chinese side that is imported by America? $127 billion. Great. All right. But what is the top item on the American side? $15.2 billion. That falls between 6 and 7 on the Chinese side. So see these comparisons. That tells you what a small power the US might feel if you started seeing trade sort of in those testosterone denominated terms. That is his number one item and my number one item, right? His number one item is more than 10 times of my number one item, and my number one item is between 6 and 7 of his items. Then see some other comparisons. The second item from America is mineral fuels, oils, distillation products. That's basically petroleum refinery products. Manufactured, but really nothing complex, nothing really challenging. If America went out of these exports, this could be easily picked up by India. India has enough refining capacity now. India is selling to Europe and a lot of other parts of the world. This much slack India could pick up. So once again, it's not something which becomes compelling for China to buy from the US. That itself is a source of dissatisfaction and anger and frustration. And number 3, what is the third item on America's list? Third most exported item to China. Hold your breath. It is oilseeds, oleagic fruits, which means basically dry fruits, grain, seeds and fruits. This is agricultural and horticultural product. That is number 3, third highest export from America to China. And you thought America was this big tech engineering giant that defined for the world what is to be built, what is the best quality, what is the best brand, etc., etc. Today, this equation, if you were Donald Trump and you still had your mind in the 60s or thereabouts, you would think that this has become almost a colonial relationship, which means I am selling agricultural goods or low-tech goods or low-value goods or low-value-added goods to China, whereas I am importing from China humongous amounts of high-tech, high-value-added engineering manufactured goods. And that can then become a source of frustration and inferiority complex as well. And then you say, how can I counter it? Maybe the Chinese do something to fix their markets, their production costs, etc. I will just increase the costs on them by imposing tariffs. In fact, after China imposed retaliatory tariffs on America, Trump has posted on Truth Social saying this is a big mistake you've made, basically that you will regret it. Before that, Trump's people had said nobody should retaliate to what Trump is doing. That will be a big mistake. So like a true bully, Trump has now said that because China has imposed these retaliatory tariffs, he's further going to double his tariffs by another 50 percentage points. So this has become a race to bottom. However, once again, if you keep looking at this data, this tells you further where this frustration is coming from. Number 4 item on the American side of what America exports to China: machinery, boilers and nuclear reactors. Of course, America is not exporting nuclear reactors to China, nor is China exporting nuclear reactors to America. This is just a category in sort of trade terminology. Basically, these are boilers and turbines for electricity plants, etc. America exports to China $12.86 billion worth. That's item number 4 on America's list in the ranking of the amount or the size of the export. Item number 4, $12.86 billion. For China, the same entry, machinery, nuclear reactors, boiler, 85 billion. So 85 billions and about 13 billion, right? So it's less than 1/6. So your electrical and electronic goods are about 1/10, right? And your machinery, boilers, turbines, etc., are about between 1/6 and 1/7. That is where Trump is getting so angry. And he thinks that by putting these duties on the rest of the world, he'll force American entrepreneurs to start manufacturing again in America. The fact, however, is that a lot of this cost advantage that many nations, including India, they have is because they have much lower labor costs. In China, labor costs may be $3 or $4. Now they've gone up maybe $3.50 or $5 also an hour. In America, it's about $35 an hour for skilled labor. Maybe for unskilled, it may be $17, $18 an hour. And even for that, from where will he find workers to do that? He will then have to allow immigration. So that'll run contrary to his other larger political purpose. If you want to do the math, you can do it right away because Donald Trump had already imposed 54% tariff on Chinese goods. Now he has added, at least he said so, another 50%, which means he now has a 104% tariff on Chinese goods. You know what that will do? If this persists, if this goes on, Chinese are very clever. Their retaliatory tariffs, they said, will start only from May. So they are giving Donald Trump the time to respond, but Trump is not. So suppose this sustains. If it sustains, what this will do is all of these goods that the Chinese were sending to America, they'll become available, and they'll become available to the rest of the world at maybe even cheaper prices. And that is where some of the experts think that America will lose out. I will make use of the voice of two experts in this case. One by way of analysis, numbers analysis, and the second by way of opinion. So Spencer Hakimian, who is a man of some consequence in the financial business, he says that it's madness to think that the Chinese will come crawling to the US because they have the compulsion to sell to the US. So he said, suppose the Chinese were selling to the US, ballpark say about 400 billion. It's actually a bit more. It's closer to 500 now. So suppose it's 500 billion. Whereas Chinese sell to the rest of the world, not including America, to the rest of the world, $3.3 trillion worth. The US, on the other hand, sells to the whole world $3.2 trillion worth. If this number of 3.2 trillion falls by 12%, he's making that 12% calculation for a reason which I will explain to you. This number falls by 12% because the world also fills with Chinese products because Chinese products are cheaper. Maybe they'll become cheaper still. Also, they have less inbuilt profit for Chinese companies. If the world starts buying from there, America's exports will go down because of reciprocal tariffs, because people will say, why should I buy from America if I can buy from elsewhere? Why should I submit myself to this terrorism by Donald Trump? And also the Chinese will sell me the same stuff cheaper, right? In the process, if America's trade or exports fall by 12%, that is equal to $400 billion plus that the Chinese now export to America. So basically, the rest of the world will replace for China what China might lose by losing these exports to the US, even if all the exports to the US cease. That's the reason he's chosen that arbitrary factor of 12%, because that gives you about $400 billion. So that's one. The second is somebody who used to be a Trump supporter, who's a man of the intellectual right, or historian of the intellectual right, also one of the greatest opinion leaders today of the intellectual right. That is Neil Ferguson. So what does he say? Neil Ferguson has written an article. Please see this article. Its headline, Trump's Tariffs and the End of the Empire. Right? See it on your screens. We'll share a link with you. You can check it out. And I will read out the highlight, which is Neil Ferguson's tweet, but also the blurb of the article. And it says, the president stands as much chance of re-industrializing the US as you do of getting your frozen laptop to work by smashing the motherboard with a Minecraft hammer. Now, Minecraft, I noticed, was spelled with a capital M, so I checked out. It's some kind of a video game business where people have devised a hammer as a weapon. So I don't know more about that. It's too complex for me. I'm sure some of you know about this, but I'm sharing a picture of a Minecraft hammer with you. So that's what Neil Ferguson is saying. So these are intellectual supporters of the American right who are also finding this situation too irrational for their own understanding.